The weight of history hangs heavy. This week, the United Reformed Church in the UK shouldered some of that burden with a historic apology for their role in the transatlantic slave trade, a brutal system that continues to cast a long shadow, particularly in the Caribbean. But apologies, while a crucial first step, can't rebuild what was shattered. The question demands our attention. Are reparations financial compensation the next step on the path to true justice? Guiding us through this complex conversation tonight are two esteemed guests, Anglican Bishop Dr. Howard Gregory, a leader with deep roots in the Caribbean community, and Advocates Chair Robert Stevens, a champion for social justice and economic equality. Bishop Gregory, Mr. Stevens, thank you both for joining the conversation. Welcome. How are you?
Thank you.
Thank
Pleasure.
you. Welcome.
Pretty good.
You recognize that I've been here before, but you know I like the idea of coming to this studio.
So you know, we have to treat you every time you come as though it's the first time that you've been here.
Very
so,
good.
So it's a part of what we try and do.
Okay.
But we have seen in the tabloid where someone, an official, a high official from the United Reformed Church, and the Church of England have apologized. They have both apologized for their church's respective roles in the slave trade, the transatlantic slave trade. What are your views on that? I'm not sure who wants to go first.
Well, let me say I was present at the service and participated in the service when the apology from the United Reformed Church was offered. Okay. But and the Church of England apology came from Archbishop Rowan Williams many years ago, and Bishop D'Souza also apologized. But I think the issue of reparation is more technical than we make out. The United Reformed Church, for example, was not actively involved here as a presence in our history. But what they recognize is that their country, Scotland, as well as some of their institutions, benefited from, and where they are today is in part from the slave trade, the transatlantic slave trade. And in fact, even some of the salaries that people receive today are still coming from those sources. So they are acknowledging their participation insofar as they're also beneficiaries of the slave trade. The Church of England was a different matter because the Church of England was very much present here and in fact was involved, had investments in the shipping arrangements, the transatlantic slave trade, in addition to what happened here. So they're coming at it from two different perspectives, but benefited from and were involved in one way or another in transatlantic slave trade and the slave experience in Jamaica.
So how significant do you view these apologies, though, especially in the light of the estimated financial debt outlined in a UN report? We have heard something to the effect of $23 trillion, of which Jamaica is owed roughly $9.5, closer to $10 trillion. How do you view that?
Well, I think it depends on how we understand reparations. For us as Christians, and certainly within my own tradition, but with Christians generally, reparations is grounded in Scripture. It is part of what happened between Esau, Jacob, those brothers who were estranged. One threatened to kill the other. There is estrangement. There is the acknowledgement of wrong. There is the attempt to bring about healing. And one brother offers livestock and what have you to make amends for what has done. So there's a whole process to it. Reparations, I think when we start to just talk money, I think we are missing the relational dimension between in the process. That it involves an acknowledgement, first of all, of participation, either directly or by one's ancestors, that one has benefited, acknowledging the hurt that it has caused to other persons. And until you can get there, even the financial arrangements will not happen. Okay? There has to be the acknowledgement, we were involved or we benefited, it was wrong, and therefore there is the reparatory justice, which is not necessarily going to be in
finances,
in terms of dollars and cents. And in fact, in going forward, even in terms of the initiative of the Church of England, It's not about, I think people think that either each man is going to get 10 pounds or 20 pounds or what have you, or there's going to be a big sum paid to government. I don't think that is going to happen. But there will be what is termed reparative justice and a sort of dialogue as to what that would look like and what would constitute appropriate amends defined on either side, because those who were offended can tell you what they are giving. Those who were offended may also have some thoughts about it. That's part of the relationship.
So, Sir Bobby, from a social justice perspective, do you think that this apology, or these apologies, because we have heard, what, 3 no, 2 from the Church of England and 1 from the United Reformed Church, at least, do you think this is a step in the right direction?
Oh, absolutely. The first thing, as Father Gregory has pointed out, is, you have to acknowledge that a wrong was done. And that has not fully been accepted by the leaders in the United Kingdom to date. There have been apologies which have been made that kind of suggest that, oh, we know that we did something wrong, but it hasn't come from the top leaders. And I think it's something that has to come from the people who control the financial means as well as the means for making reparations. That's the first thing. The second thing, however, is that once you get over the hurdle of people acknowledging that they have done a wrong and that they say, look, we benefited from it and you are in a position where we need to make amends. Once you get there, then you can talk about the form of those amends. And I think one of the things that we must push for is for our future generations to be developed in a way where the various organizations or the governments or whatever that are involved in the UK would make contributions in areas like child development and education and development of our health systems, etc., etc. What that amounts to and how that will pan out in terms of dollars and cents is a thing that we can see down the road, I suspect. But it really, to me, I don't think you're going to get somebody drawing a check or making a payment or, arranging for funds to be transferred directly.
All right, so I'm not sure what to make of both the responses that I've gotten, because I remember hearing Rishi Sunak, the Prime Minister of Great Britain, saying that we need to move beyond that. I'm not quoting him verbatim. We need to move beyond that just now, and we need to look at how to make Britain a more inclusive and tolerant society for everyone. Seemingly, he's just brushing that under the rug. So here we are, the person who you both seem to expect to get an apology from. It's not forthcoming. However, those who aren't currently directly involved ancestrally or any other way, they are the ones who are coming forward and giving an apology. What should we make?
Let me point out that the apology has been coming from the church groups.
Yes.
And there are, in fact, some educational institutions that are at that point. The governments that were the colonizing agents have not yet taken that step.
They were the primary beneficiaries, were they? Do you think? The governments?
Sure they were.
Okay.
In fact, they were the ones who instituted the whole thing and directed the process. It's the governments of England that was behind it. It was the governments. There are other nations which we can always talk about slavery involved in France and Spain and what have you. But the government was the ones that provided the whole framework and what have you for it.
And the kings and queens were very much involved. So recognize that.
By framework, because when I hear framework, I hear about financing, I hear about policy and legislation to ensure that something like that can happen.
And that comes from government.
Oh, okay.
So it's the government institutions, So that the point I'm making that even with, and people don't necessarily understand that even with the apology that has been forthcoming from church, there are members of the same church as well as the same society who take strong objection to any sense that anything is owing or any apology ought to be offered. So there are persons and institutions that are stepping forward without sort of widespread support for it. Resistance from those who have benefited and continue to benefit, saying the kind of argument that Sunak is offering, let's move beyond that. Let's just look and see how we can be an inclusive society. He's being inclusive. He's talking about England being inclusive. He's not talking about us. So he's not really addressing our issue.
How so? Unpack that part.
All right, when he talks about being inclusive, because some of that comes in the context, for example, of what England has done to our Windrush generation, you know, and the way in which they have treated them badly. And when you look at some of the responses, you see that same line coming, oh, we need to be a more inclusive society, which really means we have done some wrong to those who came over from 1948, and we need to stop the discrimination and be more inclusive. Sunak is not talking about reparations and the transatlantic slave experience. That's not what he's talking about.
Oh, all right, let me go to our first break. You are watching a conversation where we're looking at the issue of reparations and restorative justice. We'll be right back. Welcome back to the conversation. So just before we went to the break, there's a question that I wanted to ask. So I won't ask Reverend Gregory. I'll ask you, Bobby. Do you think, in light of all that the bishop has said, that the British PM stands to be on the wrong side of history?
Absolutely. Absolutely. The fact is this. It's a matter of time, I think. But what is moving in a direction is that the government of the United Kingdom will have to not only apologize, but come to the table and begin to talk about how they are going to make reparations. And the government does not only involve the political end, but also the kings and queens of England and the whole royal family that has benefited significantly from the benefits of the slave trade, as well as what they have basically gained from colonialism.
So let me jump back to the church. The Jamaican church here, they have pledged to distribute lands to those who have been affected by slavery. How do you see this specific action working in practice, and what are the potential challenges, you know, in terms of how they can be addressed? Because 90% of us.
I was present, as I indicated, when that statement was made,
Yes.
and I would pose the same question, because there are no specifics at the time. I think it's intended to convey a message that we want to do something, and we are going to do something, and land being an issue. For me, though, the part of what we need to recognize is that those involved in the control of enslavement of our ancestors, they have taken their money and they have done their exit. But we were left with the baggage, and we were left with the institutions. The churches have been the leaders in education in this country. Government is a latecomer to education. Okay? Up to about the early 50s, it was the churches. The government didn't have any high schools. There were trust schools and church schools. Okay? So in terms of, if you want to talk about making amends or whatever, it is not just making amends. This is the reality. Those who lead the church are descendants of the enslaved as well. And it is our attempt to empower, to change the life of our people that has led to the establishment of the high schools, teachers' college, children's homes, and other institutions for the benefit of our people. Land is, in the immediate period after emancipation, we know free villages and land was a part of that issue, which some churches undertook. But between that time and now, a lot of the church's contribution has been primarily in the area of education and social service across this country.
So what I'm hearing from both of you, because Sir Stevens had said it earlier, we need to see how we can use whatever financial gains we would get from reparations to strengthen our institutions, because you find that the difference sometimes, at least in my view, the difference between a lesser developed or a small island developing nation and a developed country is pretty much the institutions and the strength of the institution, the integrity of the institutions. And if you have a country with relevant, structurally sound institutions, then you tend to have longevity. Is that what you're saying?
Well, let me tell you something. If you look at our schools now, many of our schools are struggling in terms of not just their physical facilities, but retaining teachers, for instance, and making sure that our curricula are relevant to the current situation in the world. I think we need a lot of focus on education and child development. That is the one area that I think we need to put a lot more emphasis on. The other area is interventions in areas that have been neglected, what I call squatter settlements and the areas that are essentially slums. We're not putting enough attention on those areas. And for instance, many countries have now moved to the point where they are recognizing that you're never going to demolish and rebuild slums and squatter settlements. What you need to do is come up with solutions where the lands that are currently squatted on can be legitimately put in the hands of the people who are there. And when I say legitimately, it doesn't mean that you have to give them a title. What you can do is you can give them a long-term lease, because many of these lands are owned by government. And we need to begin to instill pride in these people to be able to improve their own homes and feel some security of tenure in order to move up the ladder in terms of becoming recognized members of society, if you will.
But you will agree, though, that some persons might argue against such an endeavor, because it might be seen as you are encouraging bad behavior, because here you have seen the land, you have squatted on the land, and what we're doing now is legitimizing that wrongdoing.
Look here, let us face the fact. You're talking about nearly 900,000 people out of 3 million that are in these slums and the squatter areas, okay? They're there already. So encouraging squatting to get worse is you can have a squatter settlement that is clearly defined, and you say, listen, no more of this is going to be allowed in this area. And you begin to implement the structures and the systems to be able to control that. But right now we have a situation where there are so many who are so-called squatters. You need to correct that situation. They are now not part of the normal run of things in terms of the society. And they don't have proper services. They don't have proper water, sewage, electricity, garbage collection, etc. Those things should be basic things that are provided to every Jamaican.
Let me sort of take a slightly different view. I think there's a sense that every Jamaican is entitled to a piece of land. I don't take that view. I take the view that every Jamaican is entitled to shelter, a home, a place to live. Mm-hmm. And it means then that we have to stop thinking that you have to chop up and give everybody a little square. What the reality is that we have to build proper communities with the social services, the parks, the things that, because part of the thing in squatter settlement, they don't even have the boys don't even have a place to play football. What kind of community do you create in that scenario? But I also want to go back in terms of the sort of benefits that would come from reparations. I think that one of the things we need to think of in terms of what is it that's going to advance our societies. Mm-hmm. One of the things we're talking about now is like STEM education, the science and the technology, the maths. Those are areas in which we are particularly weak. As a society, we are not going to progress very far in today's world unless we are focusing on some of those areas. So for me, when we talk about reparations, we're talking about, Brother Stevens here is talking about education. That's the kind of thing I'm talking about. How to invest in education in a way that is going to empower the people. As well as, of course, there are health concerns. There's a reason why we have all the diabetes and what have you. We need to make investments in those areas. It's part of the legacy. the CARICOM 10-point thing on reparation,
yes.
talk about the repatriation of persons to Africa, whatever. For me, I don't think that's a starter, that you're going to invest in those who want to go back to Africa to go back to Africa. My investment, as far as I understand, has to do with how to build. We are here, how to build this society. So there are certain areas in which we would need to focus, and we need to be very clear. We want to empower our people.
Well, it's funny though that you drew on STEM education, being a man of the cloth. Why didn't you say stream? Because there's STEM, there's STEAM, there's stream now, where you have religion and you have the arts.
Yes.
You know, wouldn't that be a better approach?
Well, we started with STEM, and it's been broadened now to talk of stream.
Now.
And in fact, I am currently involved in dialogue with a partner that is a center for science, actually a center in Oxford. And what we are exploring with them also is how we can partner in terms of the whole stream education in our system, given the number of schools and educational institutions that we have.
It's funny though, you know, and without segueing too far from the idea of reparations that we're talking about, that the church would be involved in STEM education, science being at the front. Persons have looked at the church and science being incompatible, while others have looked at it as being the two different sides of the same coin. So I'm not sure what are we to expect from this.
If you look at Church Teachers College, which is a church institution, you will see that it is one of those institutions offering the special option in terms of science and maths and what have you, that it is actually happening already. What we want to do is how to strengthen it.
But tell me though, so far, you know, much of the I won't call it noise, but I don't find a better term to describe it as yet. But much of the dialogue that has been going around and the sounds that have been coming up is suggesting a broader regional and governmental involvement in terms of reparations. So my question now is, what role do you and you as well envision the church and other social institutions in the West Indies playing as far as facilitating this large-scale initiative is concerned?
I've spoken, and in fact I spoke at the same service on Sunday, and I said that the churches need to have an ecumenical approach, which is various churches, but that we need to work along with social civil advocacy groups as well. That it's something we need to partner, as well as we need to support the CARICOM 10-point proposal for reparations. So it is not just a church doing a thing churches do a thing by themselves, but working with other agencies and supporting and being advocates in relation to the CARICOM proposals in terms of reparations. So there are several areas in which we will work.
So, Bobby, many have argued that reparations, well, you also have argued that reparations go beyond just an apology. It goes beyond financial compensation. But there is also a little niggle. We're talking about a shift in the power dynamics. How can the institutions here locally, globally contribute to dismantling these power imbalances that have stemmed from the legacy of slavery?
Well, it's a question of continuing our advocacy, continuing calling for reparations, calling for acknowledging what was done and what was wrong about it, and getting people to change their mindset. I think even when you look at the royal family, what is happening now is that they're doing research to determine exactly what were the benefits that accrued to the royal family over the years during those periods when colonies were really being essentially raped. And I think they're now recognizing that there were serious implications in terms of what was done and the benefits that accrued to them. So that's a step in the right direction. Now, where that goes and how it affects the governments of, those in charge of the United Kingdom, etc., we will see. But as far as I'm concerned, we are beginning to see a movement, and that is not something that we are to stop. What we are to do is to continue to ensure that it moves forward.
But don't you think that's a waste of time, though? And here's why I ask that question, rather. So I don't need to go to school to find out or to see what are the results of slavery, and I don't need that level of research to see the involvement of the royal family, not just the British royal family, but many European royal families, and beyond just the royal families, other institutions and individuals who have benefited significantly from slavery. Why is it that the king would say, okay, let me commission, it's almost saying that let me call forward a commission of inquiry that will take 1, 2, 3, 10 years perhaps to say the things that anecdotally we have known to be true?
Yeah, but there's a difference, you know. There's anecdotally and there is, you know, talking about it and all. But I think a lot of people are more convinced when they see it in black and white that is done by a university and them have professors behind it, etc. So that's an important step in my opinion. But what happens after that is exposed and is presented, we will see. And we are the ones who have to keep it on the front burner. If we just sit quietly and allow things to continue without bringing it up every now and then and raising these issues, I think it will die a natural death. But we need to keep it on the front burner.
You know, there is a need for the research abroad, but there's also a need for education of our own people. I think many young persons don't recognize that up to the 60s, Caribbean history was not taught. It was sixth form.
60s are up a little later than the 60s?
Well, it was in sixth form that many of us were doing this is when Parry, Sherlock, and Auger and these writings came out in the 60s. So it was primarily sixth formers who were doing it, and then it came through the rest of the school. So there are still a lot of our people who still don't understand how things operate and what it has done to us. But in terms of the sort of study that Bobby's talking about, the Anglican, the Church of England, and through the Church Commissioners, have in fact taken a step in terms of reparatory justice by putting aside at the moment a sum of £100 million in that direction. It has come out of an audit which the Archbishop of Canterbury ordered to look and see how we benefit, because you can talk about it, you know, but when you do an audit and you bring in professionals, say, look at our books, see what came in, from whom, our institutions, who was making contribution. It is on that basis that they have a sense of the scope and extent of their involvement, and that's taken the action. Hopefully, when the king does his audit, he will be able to see the extent to which the royal family benefited, rather than simply say, we may have benefited or we benefited.
Right,
different story.
Let me go to our next break. You are watching The Conversation, where I'm speaking with Reverend Dr. Howard Gregory and Bobby Stevens. We'll be right back. Welcome back to The Conversation, where I'm speaking with the co-chair of Advocates Network. That's Robert Stevens, as well as Reverend Dr. Howard Gregory. So just before the break, I think I almost stopped short of throwing a tantrum as it relates to the idea of a commission of inquiry. Let's call it that, into the role that how the British royal family benefited. But then we're looking at, this is not something that is new. And one of the questions that I'm tempted to ask, do you think that for those who have apologized or have taken the steps to apologize, in the same way that we hear, especially in light of the Black Lives Matter movement abroad in the US, do you think it's an issue of white guilt, why those who have apologized, and then those now who have refused to apologize, is it that they're just cold and they want to stick their heads in holes like ostriches, so they don't want to admit to what they have done or what has been done by their ancestors?
I'm sure there is an element of guilt there, but I think it's more than just guilt. I think that persons, it's your ancestors 3 generations before. Some people feel a sense that this just is inconsistent with how I understand myself and any sense of integrity and that which is right or should have happened in terms of human relations. So this is something I want to throw my, my weight behind. But obviously there may be some sense of guilt. I don't think a lot of persons feel the sense of guilt and is responding out of a sense of guilt. And in terms of things like the research, though, those things have existed a long time, but the research has been done primarily by our people and by scholars. Wasn't there scholars who do it? It was people like former Prime Minister of Trinidad and Tobago, Eric Williams, who did his research to find out how slavery ended and how economics played into all of that. So now they have to do some of that research because they have been hearing it, but they're not accepting it. When they get into the books, they will see what we have known for a long time. Okay? Then you get you see what response you will get.
What are your views on the statements that have been made just now?
Well, let me tell you something. Research done by the people who cause the problems is going to be far more important than research done by Caribbean people or people from Africa or whatever. I think it's important for them to recognize that they have to look at themselves and determine what went right and what went wrong. And the amount of, let's say, the way that they view that type of research, I believe is going to be different from what they hear from us. They want to hear it from their own researchers. So fine. Once that is done, however, it's important for us to keep the things on the front burner. As I said, we have to be advocates, to push for it, not just to be a research study and it goes into file 13, but it's something where an action comes out of it in terms of both the responses of the government as well as the royal family.
Okay, so you do believe that it's more than, based on the studies, you think that the studies will lead the apologies and the reparations to be seen as more than just a performative gesture, and so it can begin, well, as you would put it, the idea of healing both from, because trauma is weird, and even sometimes the oppressors are traumatized by the pain that they inflict, because my understanding, my own limited understanding as someone who, I'm not as aged, I'm not even sure which word to find, no, but we understand that in an effort for slavery to have gone the way it went, the oppressors would first have to try and dehumanize you, and then they can act. So it's something that has started with how they see themselves, and then in turn how they see us, or how they saw our ancestors, and then they would have taken action based on those value systems that they have implemented. So now, is it that we're saying the research that is being done or that should be undertaken might actually have an effect wherein it reverses that outlook, you know, first on us, how they see us, and then how they see themselves? You think that?
I think it is both, because it begins with a notion of racial superiority. And therefore, on that basis, they are able to treat, and they talk about the dehumanizing, they're able to dehumanize the black race and to treat you as inferior, and then to find philosophical, but also to search for biblical things to justify the distinctions that they have made and the way in which they have treated you. I don't know, for example, lots of Jamaicans, certainly when I was in school and doing history, I never heard, for example, about the slave Bible. The slave Bible was...
I've heard of it.
I've seen it.
Yeah.
I've seen it, where over 50% of the Old Testament was eliminated. Anything that had to do with freedom and liberation of people out of Egypt, that was taken out. And about half of the New Testament, where Paul talks about being freed Christ, those things were taken out because it was a way of justifying it. Now, hopefully, with an engagement of the issues, people may begin to say, we were wrong, or we need to look at our relationships differently. I don't think you're going to get an wholesale conversion where people, the white races and those people are going to say, well, you know, we are not who we thought we were. And that is what is going to come out of the relationship that from the confession before you get to the reparation is part of that engagement. You're going to meet resistance, so that someone like the Archbishop of Canterbury, who has been speaking for and supporting the reparative action that has been taken, he gets threatening letters almost every day from his own people who feel you shouldn't be talking like that, you shouldn't be agreeing to anything like that, you shouldn't be accepting the notion of reparations. Okay? So you see, what needs to happen is not just saying they're going to come to recognize it. Some are going to step out, because I think even these people from the United Reformed Church, they are some of their own members who are going to say what you're doing you shouldn't do.
So
I think we also need to understand, that even slavery and the abolishment of slavery was not something that happened overnight.
No, we understand that.
Right? It took a lot of pressure, and a lot of it came from the churches, right? And what you recognize is that it's a process and a movement that builds momentum to the point where it becomes so embarrassing that people have to respond. And that is what led to the abolishment of slavery. No, we're on a different tack now. We're on a tack where we're saying, look, slavery occurred. It was something that was totally wrong. You need to accept that it was wrong and begin to talk about how you are going to make reparations for that wrong. So it's a totally different movement at a different phase.
But the Reverend just made some statements a while ago, and I'm hearing that there might be concerns that focusing on reparations could actually serve to divide the communities. So the question is, how can reparations be pursued in a way that would foster healing and reconciliation as opposed to further divide and separation?
The healing is going to be those who represent and have stepped forward to represent those who are responsible for enslavement and those who have been enslaved. It doesn't mean that the whole society of those who belong to the enslavers are going to be in support of it. Because as I've indicated, those initiatives that have been taken so far, there are thousands, probably hundreds of thousands, who are opposed to it. And that's why people like Sunak probably, whether he believes in it or not, would be even measured in what he would say, because he knows that politically his people are not with him as a population as such. Okay? So it's going to be some of those who are bold enough to stand out, to face the heat, and to take the initiatives to say, listen, what we did was wrong. We think that we need to do something, even if we're not being supported by the folks behind us.
Oh, so we're not even sure where to begin this particular process, because we have, well, I know for one, I have not been around for that long, and I've heard a number of things, both a number of arguments both for and against the idea of reparations, and I think largely it's because we don't yet have a fulsome understanding as to what exactly is reparations and what are those things that are involved in the full process of reparations. So I guess in summary, what I'm asking is, how do you explain reparations in simple terms so that the average man on the road can see it for what it's worth and then begin to make value judgment based on the information that he now has? I'll start with Mr. Stevens.
Well, you first of all have to understand that Jamaicans and people in our area need to be aware of the history and understand what took place. Many people are still not even aware of what happened in slavery. The second thing is for them to understand how it has affected us. Today, for instance, we still have this principle of divide and rule that is affecting us even in our politics. We have a situation where people don't get together as a country, as a people, and say, look, let us work on solving a particular issue, whether it be crime or it be unemployment or whatever, or economic development. What happens is that you get a lot of people who come out with statements, and it's always a kind of a quarreling or a fighting at the top, instead of pulling together as one. Government, for instance, in Jamaica right now is divided. If you look at even the United States, you're seeing, again, divisions. And I think we need to get over this and begin to focus on the importance of human betterment and human survival. You know, when you look at an issue like climate change, we're not going to deal with climate change unless we all come together and understand what it is, what is causing it, and then begin to move together to sort out the problems. So I believe it's, as I said before, you have to keep advocating for a movement of the process. And everybody needs education. Everybody needs to be aware of what was and what we are trying to do for the future.
Reverend?
I think there's an element of reparation in our justice system, you know, although we, as a people, we want retribution rather than reparation. But the system does allow for someone who has committed an offense to be tried, to acknowledge that he or she has done wrong, and maybe even be imprisoned, but also to be able to, and one of the ways in which in some systems it is understood that while one is imprisoned, one makes some payment or one works to both apologize to the family or the person he has hurt or harmed or what have you, and there may be some payment, it may be community service, but it may be actual payment of something, so that there is a basic principle that someone has done something wrong, there is room for acknowledgement that one has done something wrong, and to be able to say, I am sorry, and one expression of this is by making some repayment. That may be the form in which it comes. But I'm also saying that reparations for us is not necessarily going to be the payment of trillions as calculated. It may have to do that the University of Scotland connects with the University of the West Indies through a partnership program that is going to share whatever labs, facilities, whatever. That for me is as a lot if it can empower our people, the descendants of the enslaved, and different thrusts along that line.
All right. So continue to stay with us. You are watching The Conversation. We go for our final break. We'll be right back. Welcome back to The Conversation. We can look and we can see the statements are there in many of the major newspapers that there has been a decline rather in major crimes right across the island in many jurisdictions. However, we cannot say definitively that there has been a major decline in crimes, even though we have also seen that there has been a reduction in unemployment. So we have seen reduction in unemployment, a decline in major crimes, but no major decline in crimes. What do you think is causing that to be so slow in terms of that decline that we want in major crimes and so on?
I would like to say that it has got to be where our leaders, right, both in the private sector, the government, the opposition, and the NGOs, need to focus a lot more attention and time on assessing exactly what this problem is, because it's not a, as you rightly say, it's a multifaceted problem. You can't point to the fact that there are not enough police out there and say that we need to put more and that's going to solve crime. The fact is, we have to address some of the social issues as well. We have to get out there and begin to understand what is leading people to crime, which most of us intuitively know, but we need to have some interventions that are going to be agreed upon. There are some timelines, there are things that are going to be your known things that you want to achieve, and it has to bring everybody to the table. And the leader of all of that movement has got to be your Prime Minister.
Reverend Doctor, there is such a thing as the Crime Monitoring and Oversight Committee And I would make the assumption that they are doing most, if not all, of what Sir Stevens has made reference to. Do you think that we are not doing enough to strengthen the institutions or the organizations, or we're not bringing the right stakeholders to the table to have this discussion about crime?
Let me put it this way. My information is that that body is not functioning with the effectiveness with which it was designed to function.
How so?
I don't think all of the stakeholders are throwing in the weight in the way in which it was intended to be. That's about how I would express it. But I think that a couple of things in relation to crime. One is the statistics can reflect the fact that the police, there's more police presence, there's more intelligence, that they're getting more guns. But is that the end of crime? Or is it something that, as Bobby is saying, in terms of its multifaceted dimension, there is a sense in which I feel that we need to look at what is causing our people to turn to crime and violence in the way. We have yesterday the display by the high school students from schools, even one of the schools, in fact, more than one that I'm connected with. There's a display in the public space of what violence that leads to crime looks like. Where is that coming from? Because there isn't enough police standing there? Can't be. There has to be that there's something more. Some speak of it in terms of our history, but there's something happening that is making us resolve our differences and our conflicts in different ways. But you also have to reckon with the fact that domestic violence is a real issue. What is happening in our relationship between men and women, what is happening in our homes that is leading to this level of violence that we are seeing. There's something happening there that we need to address. So I feel that while we want to focus on statistics and relate the statistics to police work, I think that the issue is much bigger than that, and it related. Bobby speaks, for example, about we know of the concentration of the crime in certain areas. We know that the statistics for Norbrook and Beverly Hills look different from certain other communities. What is it about the communities that is different? What is it about the conditions under which people live that may impact their lives? What sort of, again, social provision? When you put people together in communities, if you drive through some of those communities and see the conditions under which people live, where do the boys play football? Where is the green space? Those are things that impact how we behave and how we see ourselves.
But are there green spaces in the areas that you just mentioned a while ago, though?
Yeah, you certainly have
right in your yard, you have green space.
Yeah, our children are playing on the front lawn. Point I'm making, though, and I think we're both making, is that you have to look at this thing as a big picture and begin to put in solutions where everybody is committed. And as I said before, you have to have the man in charge who is driving everything as your prime minister, because he is the one that can pull in some of the government as well as private sector and NGOs to the table. To me, it is important that organizations like a CMOC, etc., are led or at least are having the intervention of the Prime Minister. When Bruce Golding was around, I think Bruce Golding, in my opinion, played a far more important role in terms of his presence in pulling together these types of coalitions. Now, granted, there were other problems that arose, right, which affected his position as Prime Minister. But the point is that we need to bring and recognize that one hand can't clap. It can't be government alone or private sector alone or whatever. bring everybody around the table and lead it.
But then, going back to the question, I wouldn't say that I'm not overly satisfied with the answer that I received. It's just that, do you think that, so moving beyond just the Prime Minister taking a more leadership role in these things, because I think that might be, as far as some persons are concerned, too much weight or too much pressure being placed squarely on the Prime Minister. But do you think that they're doing enough to strengthen the institutions, one, and to call all the relevant stakeholders? Is it that we are missing out some? Because if you're planning for me, and the things that you're planning for me are not things that I'm used to or things that I'll ever be exposed to, wouldn't it be an exercise in futility?
No, hold on a second. You can't plan for an inner city community without the inner city people being at the table.
Point
That's
exactly,
the first.
yeah.
So when you talk about the macro planning, it's one thing. When you get into the micro and implementation side of things, if you don't involve the people, it's dead. Okay? So that whole process, I mean, I've worked in communities that are squatter communities, even in Jamaica as well as in Accra, Ghana. And we were absolutely amazed when you bring the people to the table and you talk about how we're going to work together to improve the conditions, straighten out the roads, put in the sewers, put in the water, etc., etc. And everybody gets a lease for the land that they have their little 2x2 house on, right? And all of a sudden, you see everybody showing a level of pride and a level of interest in community development that you have never seen before. What happens to crime there? It goes almost down to zero. Because all of a sudden, people are more interested in fixing up their houses and developing a relationship with their next door neighbor and having community meetings and all that, rather than getting into quarreling and crime. So to transform this society, you have got to begin to A, agree on the macro approach, and B, get into the micro. And the micro means getting into all of the squatter communities. You can't leave them out. I'm not saying you can do all of them one time, but you have to have a program that indicates this is the direction we are going in.
Do you think that we've been looking at the wrong things for too long?
I mean, there's some things that we have been looking at. Certainly we have to look at policing and we have to look at technology and all of those things. But when you take, for example, some of the major crimes connected to things like scamming and gang warfare and extortion and what have you, what is it that leads our youngsters to choose scamming as an option? And youngsters in high school will tell you when you ask what they want to do when they leave school, some of them will tell you outright scamming. What is it that we have all gone through school, you have gone through school? What is it that makes you find your sense of identity today in a gang rather than even in an organization within the school? And we're not talking about one school. We're talking about schools across this country. The question is, what is it that is happening to our youngsters? What is generating this? If you think in terms of the gunmen, the criminals that have been killed over the years, we've killed 100 of them. But the stream keeps coming. What is creating that stream that if you kill off 300 this year, whatever our murder rate looks like, we're going to have some next year?
So you're saying that we're fixing the symptoms and not the root causes?
I think we are fixing a lot of the symptoms and not the root causes. And in so doing, what I feel we are doing as a society is to say that it is a police problem and it is not our problem. So once they fix it, everything will be all right.
What do you think, though, are some of the primary root causes, though?
I think
parenting, for one thing. I don't know that a lot of people fully understand their role as parents. And many of our families in Jamaica are led by women. And the men neglect that role of a man in a family. It's very important that we begin to think about some of these relationships that happen within not just inner city communities, but throughout the society. The fact is that examples that are set in Parliament for instance, in the way that people talk to each other and deal with each other and operate. It filters throughout the entire society. When you see people looking at people that are going after each other in a way that is obviously not very nice, and you see them quarreling with each other, you know, you have to say to yourself, hold on, what kind of example are we setting? We need to settle our differences in a different way where we can sit down around the table and agree, look, here is a national strategy and a national approach. We're all going to agree on, let's move together to implement it.
But there's a values issue, for example. You could not go home while you're a schoolboy and tell your mother you have a 2-bedroom house, you haven't worked one day in your life, and you have a taxi, and your mother pleased with you. A lot of the youngsters who are in scamming, they own house, they own several cars, and the home is pleased. There's some value issues going on that we need to face. I'm sure your mother would have something to say to you. And what is happening, why we're not hearing that?
So Mr. Stevens just spoke about the role of men in the home and all of that. But we're living in a world that, at the very least, is now contemporary. It's no longer traditional views. And you find that the roles of men and women are now fluid. I think that's the new word that's bandied about. It's now fluid. So what exactly do we mean when we say the role of a man vis-a-vis the role of a woman in terms of helping to fix this particular issue?
Look here, men have got to face their responsibilities. In many cases, I speak to women who are leaders of their household. And what has happened is they have a child for a man, and the man goes off and has another child with another woman and goes all over the place having children. And guess what? He does not bear the responsibilities of taking care of those children in terms of dealing with their schooling, dealing with their clothing, etc., etc. Many men just have children and walk away. And
Don't know his name. They don't know the names of the children.
You know,
You ask him.
it's a big problem.
But isn't that a failing on the part of the female, though, in terms of making poor choices? I'm just asking the question. I'm not blaming it.
No. Blame the men who are irresponsible.
I'm just wondering.
But you know, it's interesting because there is somebody who has a company, and they give some sort of cash and certificates for at the beginning of the term for parents to be able to get things for their children at school. And they will ask the mothers, you know, the name of the children that they give them. They ask the father, what's the name of the mother? Putus. What's the name of the children?
Poochie.
I think Poochie or Cutie.
Yeah.
And where she go to school? No, you know. I remember. Which tells you the involvement, the relationship is missing, and relationship is key. Your father don't even have to earn a lot of money, but if he's there and present, and too many homes, the father is absent, some mother is absent, and for many children in this country, if grandma is not there, there's no caregiver. There's no caregiver. So it's not just man or woman.
It's family structure.
Family structure. Yeah.
All right. So, gentlemen, we are at the end of our particular discussion. There's much more that's left to be said as far as the reparation issue is concerned. I'm sure that we're just beginning to scratch the surface of that particular aspect of the conversation. And then the idea now of homes and families and the structures that we can, because reparations wouldn't necessarily make sense unless there's a context within which we can enjoy the returns from reparations, and a part of that is healing, and the family is broken, and the family can also benefit from that kind of a healing in terms of the institutions that we can put together. So rest assured that we most likely will call on you again, but until then we want to thank you. So we just spoke with the advocate, well, one of the co-chairs of Advocates Network, Mr. Robert Stevens, as well as the Anglican Bishop for Jamaica, Reverend Dr. Howard Gregory. I am Kwame Thomas, and this has been The Conversation. Do have yourselves a wonderful rest of the evening.